Welcome, everyone, to this IMS Leadership Conversations podcast. My name is Charles Good, your host, and also the president of the Institute for Management Studies. This podcast is designed to highlight relevant research and practical applications from esteemed leadership experts and practitioners. Today, I'm so happy to be joined once again by Dr. Ellen Burts-Cooper, who has been featured in Time Magazine, Black Voices, Cleveland Business News, Bloomberg BusinessWeek. She works across numerous industries, including manufacturing, healthcare, government agencies, and not-for-profit. And she's also on the faculty of Case Western Reserve University in the Weatherhead Executive Education Program. Or not to exclude her best-selling author role, which she's also one of. And she has a best-selling book called aMAZEing: Organizational Teams, Navigating 7 Critical Attributes for Cohesion, Productivity, and Resilience. And that's going to be the focus of this episode with her, talking about how to build these effective teams. Thank you for joining me today, Ellen.
Hello, Charles. Thank you for having me.
I always like to start it out with something personal that I find so fascinating with you, is that you have your PhD in organic chemistry from Virginia Tech, which organic chemistry for me in college wasn't my favorite subject, but how getting a PhD in organic chemistry led you into the path that you're currently on. Love to hear that little bit of background and connect the dots for us.
Well, I was in manufacturing for a number of years and I enjoyed that field. And I was working more and more with teams, right? Getting global teams to make decisions very quickly, to be more efficient, to work together more effectively. And I started to pick up numerous skills on teams. And it hit me, Charles, that no matter how much you have the right formula for something in a chemical lab, unless you can get those teams to work effectively together, build a high-performing team, the rest is less relevant. And so I became fascinated with what you could do around teams. So I moved off independently. And the trick is, majority of the companies I work with are either technical in some nature or chemical companies. So we speak the same language.
That seems like that'd be a great advantage as well. You're right. So let's start. So this model that you have for teams is based on over 14 years of data collection, studying what the most effective teams do in various industries, and then providing those insights in this very condensed book, which is a great book to have, a guidebook, I would say. But the first step that you say is you got to start with trust. That's the heart of every high-performing team.
It's foundational. And when you think about it, companies call and they say, Ellen, I need help with engagement or inclusion or communication. But Charles, if you think about it, maybe I'm not engaging because I don't trust the system. So we tend to find that the foundational piece and the underlying is, do you have an environment where we build trust so that people feel comfortable communicating and engaging and being inclusive? So I always start there as the foundational element.
Let's dive into that a little bit deeper. And I'd love to know some of the behaviors, common behaviors that erode trust on a team.
Right. Well, we found that when we go into workplaces over years and years, it came down to 5 elements we see over and over again. And when you think about these 5, you'll start to understand, oh yeah, I can see how that might erode trust, or if I practice that, how I might enhance trust on the team. One of them is competence. Many times you see people who may say, why was I not promoted? And it may be that the person doesn't feel that you're competent, not just in your technical skills, but also in your leadership competencies, even as simple as knowing organizational values and making sure you understand how current events might impact the team in your city or your area. So being competent. We found another one being social, engaging with your team. And not everyone will want to engage in the same way. But we found that there's a barrier of absence of trust that needs to be removed. I have to know you to be able to trust you. That's foundational. So getting to know your teams beyond just the work. Also, how you make decisions, that is critical. Do you consider your stakeholders? Am I able to trust that you made that decision in the best interest of the team? Was it mutually beneficial where possible? And then there were 2 other factors around communication, and there was a lot there to unpack. We could spend some time there, but really are you able to be vulnerable in your communication? Honest with your feedback? Are you watching the things that you say to others? So there was a lot around communication that can make you trustworthy or erode trust. And then finally, it was contractual trust. This is that you deliver what you promise to the organization. And if circumstances change, like we've seen over the last few years, did you make a contingency plan so that we can trust that you still will deliver, but maybe the plan has changed a bit? So if I were to summarize those: competence, do you know your stuff so we can trust it? Do we get to know each other? Do we make decisions, especially cross-functionally, thinking about our stakeholders? Do we watch our communication? And do we deliver? Those factors over and over drive towards high performance on a team.
Well, that's great. There's a lot there to unpack, but that's a nice overview of all the facets of trust that you really need to be on the lookout for as you're trying to develop these high performance teams. Now, trust in the virtual world, is that different on teams, or are we looking at those same five, right? Or does it depend on asking different questions?
Charles, we found that the toolkit didn't change. But what we're finding in the absence of being with each other each day, we're finding that you may have to focus in certain areas more than others. Prior to 2020, we found that decision-making trust was the most violated trust factor, simply because people didn't have time. Oh, I barely have time to think about my own work, and now I have to think about all these other departments. Yeah, we do. But after 2020, here's what we found. It was social engagements and interaction trust. People weren't able to engage in the same way. So the factors didn't change, but we found that you have to focus more in certain areas, making sure you show up, turn the camera on the video where possible, do more frequent check-ins. You may have to show appreciation on a more regular basis than you did before. So just making sure that for every team, each factor may need to be emphasized more in this new environment, but the factors didn't change.
And I would agree with you. And I think asking certain questions might elicit different responses. So how are you going to handle tough conversations remotely, right? Where that's a big one, where it's going to be different. You can't see them face to face in person. That what do you do in those cases? Or what do we do and how do we make decisions when not everyone's in the room and they're working different hours? So.
Absolutely. And if I'm not in the room, am I at a disadvantage because I'm not there? And something even as simple as, Charles, you'll laugh at this one. I had my first in-person meeting and we did our norm. We extended our hands to shake and we both pulled back and we looked, and it was this awkward moment, and we just sort of did this and we both put our hands back to our side. And just, why as a team didn't we ask the question ahead of time? What's okay? What will make us feel comfortable? So you're right. You definitely have to adjust the questions that we're asking because we're in a new environment.
Oh, you're right. And really getting into what we think other people perceive us as, right? Because we judge ourselves by our intentions. Other people judge us by our behavior. We don't see our behavior necessarily. Sometimes those are blind spots to us, but others never see our intentions. So when you say leadership starts with intent, which is driven by our thoughts, right?
Absolutely. And the impact, many times we talk about intention, but we also have to talk about impact of those behaviors. So although, Charles, I didn't have negative intent when I said that, but I still have to be accountable and own the fact that that could have had a negative impact on you. So we have to talk about both of those pieces in order to continue to gain trust and also maintain it with our team. The repeated misuse of trust and sorry, I didn't mean it, wasn't my intention, you will erode trust pretty quickly with your behavior.
Well, the intent shows up in our behavior.
Yeah.
But then I would argue it also directs our leadership style as well, right?
Absolutely. It absolutely does.
And then even further from that, right, then that becomes your reputation. So you have to kind of see that connection so that you know that it starts with your intent, which is your thought process, shows up in the behaviors that you're doing every day, directing your style, and then your reputation is based off of that.
Absolutely. And I think if we start earlier connecting our reputation to our behavior, I mean, fundamentally we know it, but each day we wake up and we walk into work, we go into work, we video in, I want us to think about how do my actions in this meeting, this interaction, this email I might write, this communication, how will it impact my overall reputation and the ability for my team to trust me? If we start with that, I think it will alter and adjust our behaviors and how we show up for our team.
I would agree. And having that self-awareness piece, right, that you're alluding to, do you understand your emotions? Can you recognize their impact on others? So critical, but then taking it a step further, right? Not only having the self-awareness, but also having the self-regulation that if you know your triggers, because you're self-aware of those, are you able to control your emotions and those impulses when you're in situations with your team that might be difficult or you're having those tough conversations?
Charles, you're covering the emotional intelligence factors that we've heard over and over, but the repeated practice of these is critical, right? It's really critical that we continue to practice these over and over. We can't hear about self-awareness and regulation enough because each day there's some new stressor that comes into our world. When you think you have it down, then all of a sudden something new comes along. So reinforcing these behaviors and these traditional tools are really critical.
Is there a tip that you can give our listeners regarding self-awareness? Because I hear this a lot from leaders. They have these blind spots, they aren't self-aware enough, or they don't know where to begin.
Get feedback. If I had to really push it, it's getting feedback, whether that's informal or formal. Informal could be, hey, how did I do in that meeting? Would you mind giving me a bit of feedback? But it also might be formal feedback where you take what we call the 360. It's a holistic survey of your skills from various people, but getting the feedback is critical and creating a culture of feedback so it just becomes the way we work. Because many times we do it so infrequently, it becomes awkward and we're afraid to give the feedback and we might get defensive. We don't understand it. So creating a culture of feedback is directly connected with people understanding and being more aware of self.
You're right. And an essential piece of the feedback is giving feedback on if you appreciate someone, if you recognize them, right? And knowing the difference between the two, because we talked about this in your last episode. I don't think anyone feels overappreciated. You can't say that enough. And appreciation is valuing them, right, for who they are. Recognizing them, you recognize them for the results they're delivering.
Absolutely. And you need both. You definitely need both and need to understand that sometimes that needs to be customized, right? It really needs to fit the person to show that you put thought into how you want to generate that appreciation. And actually, it's enjoyable. You actually create energy each time you appreciate. So I sometimes see that the person providing the appreciation, their energy goes up just as much as the person receiving. So it's a gift that goes both ways.
When I would say that there's two traits really that you've identified in your book that have atrophied most during these challenging times. We covered one of them, behavior management, but the other one is really meeting management. And how do we set up, what are some advice or some suggestions or tips that you can give our listeners on how to conduct better meetings or be better at that meeting management piece?
I have a checklist for you, Charles. It's tried and true. I use it each time I decide to hold a meeting. The first, before I even get into that, is thinking about who's in that room, whether it's a virtual room, in person. These are brains in the room. These are people in the room. That's salary time in the room. Would you really be negligent to waste that? That's the first thing I start thinking. As a result of this hour, what will people get from this particular meeting? And so I start with the first thing is, why are you holding it? Have a business reason. It needs to connect to something within the organization. Social engagement is a reason, right? We want to build trust by getting to know each other. There's a number of reasons why, but understand why you're getting that many brains and salaries into a room. Then here is my favorite. What are the expected outcomes? It's great to have an agenda, but an agenda is just a list of topics. For each agenda item, what do we hope to achieve in this 60-minute meeting or this 30-minute meeting? So for example, you say, Charles, let's talk about training is the agenda topic. Well, are we going to schedule the training? Are we going to create the training? Are we going to discuss the timeline for the training? Each of those outcomes would have me show up a little differently. So by knowing that ahead of time, we get aligned and on the same page even before the meeting starts. I see so many people in the hallway. What's this meeting about? why are we going? And then they spend the whole meeting multitasking and you leave and you say, what did you accomplish? I don't know, they'll send out some notes. So why do you want to do it? What do you hope to accomplish? Who needs to help you accomplish it? So the who is driven by the what are the outcomes. And then you get into what's my strategy? Every meeting needs to have a strategy. Will we use sticky notes on the board? Will we use breakout rooms? So once we start with the why, the what, the who, the how, then you determine how long and where and more the logistics piece. But those first pieces are critical. And I would say if I had to really push on one, each meeting prior to holding should have an expected outcome.
Well, how about if the outcome is, I mean, there's really no outcome in it, but it's in this virtual culture, everyone's just lonely. This meeting's providing a sense of belonging, a connectedness, and that's really the purpose of the meeting. Would you advocate for those or?
Yes, and yes, because one of the outcomes, if you look at core values from any organization, inclusion, belonging, creating an environment where everyone can do their best work. That's an absolutely perfect outcome, is that we get to know each other so we understand how to work more effectively together. So social engagement, any of those, if you can connect it to a core value or something critical in the organization, it's an outcome. It just needs to be stated ahead of the meeting so that people can start to understand how to align to what's expected.
No, that's great. And really also developing those team norms around communication, right? Which is maybe more difficult in this virtual or hybrid space, so that you can get more accustomed to the work rhythms, to the consistency of work hours. What is the etiquette for video, right? And is there any sites or email or, so those are things that maybe we didn't talk about before, but would you agree that they are critical now?
Absolutely. All of those things are still critical. What we found with all of these tools, Charles, is that the rules didn't change of how we show up. Now, we may have to apply those rules differently, emphasize some more than others. But what happened in the last few years is many of the things that we could sort of cover up or hide or in the workplace were uncovered. And we have to now deal with the fact that some of the inefficiencies that should have been cleaned up were not. For example, I mean, if I'm in the office, I can run down the hallway and grab that paper off your desk and run to the meeting. Well, I don't have that option if we're working remote. So all of a sudden, Ellen's not prepared. Where's the document? Well, I normally could run and grab that, or we could pre-meet in the hallway very quickly before. So making sure we're as prepared as possible with the tools that we're using is absolutely critical, even more so in this world, because we don't have the same level of access to each other.
Couldn't agree more. Even though today's teams seem to be more diverse and dispersed than ever, everyone still knows and should realize the importance that remarkable teamwork equals remarkable results, right? And don't forget to celebrate team success, because that's also essential to do, even maybe more so today, right? Because it gives you an opportunity to connect, to have that sense of belonging. And I love the acronym TEAM stands for Together Everyone Achieves More. So that's, a great way to frame it and to make sure that everyone's looking at it with the proper context.
And the concept of team, Charles, I'll always say it this way: when people say, oh, I have a meeting to go to, is your team there? Yeah. This should give you a ton of energy, because by myself, I can accomplish only so much. I have 2, 3, 5 other people who are there to help me accomplish this goal. That should give us energy. So if we practice these tips and tools, we start to show up in a place where we're excited to see the very people that will help us accomplish the common goal.
I love when you say these things and these perspective, these mindset changes, that they're great. So it's not you going to a meeting that you really don't want to go to. It's you going to a team or being a part of a team and having this discussion around that and making that the focus, right? Instead of saying, well, this meeting, I'm tired of this meeting, but hey, my team's going to be there. I'm part of that team. I need to be there. And that's a chance to celebrate our wins and look at the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
So as we end the episode, I always like to ask one final question. In this case, I'd love to ask you, if you had one tip, one piece of advice for your younger self, say your 20-year-old self, in terms of leadership development, what would that be? Or if you can't name one, maybe a few tips.
I would say being intentional about it, right? I would read a book, go to a class and practice a little bit, and then that. Being very intentional and having planning time, just thinking time, to just sit and think through the tools, to practice them, to revisit them, to understand how they might be impacted by my style. So I would say intentionality and planning is absolutely critical. I wish I had spent more time focused on a few areas of leadership versus going to a bunch of classes and not applying any of it, right? That's what I would tell my 20-year-old self.
Well, that's a great piece of advice because a lot of new leaders and a lot of younger ones coming in try to tackle too much. Think they can do it all. Don't focus on those essential few things. I think it's sometimes difficult, though, to identify what those are and where you think you can add value and be differentiated. But if you know those, focus on those and delegate the rest.
Absolutely. Well
Well,
said.
well, thank you, Ellen, for joining me today. Remind our listeners how they can get in contact with you.
Well, if you want to get in contact with me, you can go to my website at improveconsulting.biz. We have a lot of tips and tools there. I hope you have a chance to visit.
Thank you again. And this concludes this episode of the IMS Leadership Conversations podcast. You can send us your feedback at info@ims-online.com. If you'd like to subscribe, this podcast can be found both on Apple and Spotify. And until next time, remember, it's not what you know, but what you do consistently that makes a difference.